you don't want to chase money and then have to do something for several years of your life that you don't want to do. So you have to prepare to win, and then you have to, be prepared to win. So what I'm going to do is I'll probably spend, it could be as little as 15, 20 minutes of actual presenting, and you can interrupt even on that. And then what I thought was we would, then open it to kind of discussion. And by that point, some folks may say, oh, this is actually not for me, want to move out. And others may want to actually start talking about ideas, and, as well as what I'm showing. So by my standards, it's a pretty short presentation. So a little bit of background just to say, I think why me and who am I? Prior to 2002 or so, I was actually a PI or co-PI or co-writer on several federally funded grants. I was working with adult ed contracts through the National Center on Adult Literacy, where I was professionally working. And so we would get things there. And then I ended up in partnerships with a number of really wonderful researchers who were winning NICHD grants in reading research. And then for me, the biggest first one was this jointly funded adult reading intervention project that was a cross-agency funding opportunity. But when I was moving to Memphis, I had this huge, set of paper files that I, had not looked at for years because I've more or less gone green. And so I had to decide how much of the 1,000 pounds of paper I was going to transport to a 2-bedroom apartment in Memphis. And in doing so, I came across an embarrassing number of grant proposals that I had written and failed to have funded. So, I completely was in denial and blanked out that part of the history. So it's not that it wasn't trial and error and practice to get to do it. And that's kind of for people writing them who haven't been funded, but I see a number of people on here who already are. IES is funded in 2002, actually. It's a sort of news agency in the Department of Ed. And actually in the early years, as they were figuring out how they were going to fund things, I had 2 unsolicited funded projects that paved the way for me understanding who the people were there and sort of about the things rolling. And one was like a conference and book, and one was one that's a great story peculiar to ETS. You can hear me okay, right? And this was because several high-profile researchers were highly critical of the Praxis teacher certification test that ETS is the publisher of. And so they sort of, that criticism got all the way up to the head of IES. And so I had just joined ETS at that point, and they tapped me to sort of do a whole review process of all the item content, which was a great opportunity. And I think the key thing about these 2 that I want to point out is I ended up meeting a lot of the community cohort in reading research. So they knew me personally, I knew them. IES is not a blind process. And so, I think that building of the relationships, even in this sort of way, helped a lot. I wasn't just a name on a page or a set of publications. I was also somebody they had worked with professionally. Now, I'm not saying all of them or many of them were on the research panels. I never know. But it did sort of establish, a sense of being part of that community of researchers, just like going to conferences does. And then in 2005, I actually competed and won an assessment grant, the first one at ETS. And the only thing I wanted to point out here was that, IES was still figuring out how they were going to do it. And I won this grant without ever mentioning the sample size for the studies I was doing. And I looked back a couple of years later and realized, because I looked back because we won it. And I said, okay, well, what did we promise? And it turned out we didn't promise anything. And yet, somehow the rest of it was coherent enough, and the reviewers were still getting used to their jobs, I guess. So they let me get away with that. the trust level of the reviewers in your proposal, it's gotten much more rigorous. They don't have a great deal of trust that you're just going to know the right sample size. So this one is, I want to make a couple points. This is sort of the 15-year sweep since. And so IES has been my major funder. I've had some other funding, but it's mostly been back and forth to them. Despite being at ETS, I'm kind of proud to say that we've won in the different goal structures of IES, and I'll go over a little bit later, a little bit of that goal structure. But we won measurement grants, development grants, exploration grants, and then I was partnered on some other style IES grant projects. And today I'm mostly talking about the standard ones. I'll show you in a minute. The second thing to note is that a lot of partnering. You know, as you see here, there were some grants we won, some grants we were sub-awarded on. Even the ones we won, there was a lot of sub-awards out. I'm a very strong advocate of building partnerships and relationships across institutions. And certainly, if even within, across departments and colleges. Third thing to point out is, yeah, it's not all me. I mean, I would count almost all of these as what I like to think of as a Sabatini production, meaning we had a style that we sort of used, and but you know that's taking nothing away from all these PIs, and you know we worked with ideas of you know whoever came up with them, and then crafted them to be winning projects. And I just highlighted in green the fact that one of these stands out as being bigger than the others, the center grant, which sort of was a culmination, I think, of a lot of this work to be able to get that one. And then the ones in light blue at the top, as you see, are actually, or darker blue, are the ones I still have here. So these are still, those are the current ones. And again, as you see, they're a mix of the same kind of mixture. And this last season, we put 4 more in. You know, again, I saw a couple of colleagues from CREP there who are in, I think, a couple of these. And in this case, and this is my hope from here on out, is I will lead very few as lead PI. I like to work in the, co or investigator level to develop these. But you can see we have 3 different institutions here, 2 from here, 1 from my colleagues back at ETS, and 1 from Middle Tennessee State. So this is the major grant program that I mostly go to, sort of mostly gives you a guideline for things. And a couple quick notes about that. By the time, the letter of intent is, for those who haven't done this, is really optional. What it's doing is telling them what your idea is. And I think its most influence, the largest influence, is it may help them to pick special reviewers for the panel to make sure they have expertise to cover your area. So in a way, you're signaling who might be a good reviewer for you. And that's not a bad thing to signal if you know who might be sympathetic to your cause. The point of this is that it's not a lot of time between when the actual package comes out and when the proposals due. So you have to start now. Is not bad. Certainly in the winter, you should be planning well ahead if you think you're going to competitively go after this. Don't wait for the call to come out. Last year's call, the best predictor of this year's call is last year's call. They change bits and pieces each year, and the reviewers are, continuous. So they're not even up to speed with the new changes, and many of them are working off of an older model. So it doesn't hurt to start early, which is why I think Steve called me to talk now, because now is when you should be thinking about this. And one of the things that's really interesting here is that they give you flexibility about your start date, and they don't ask you this till you're funded, which is nice because you sort of, some grants you're up in speed running already, and others you want to take a little more time. So that's a strategic point when you're funded about. I prefer usually to take the later date and push things out because IES awards a 1-year no-cost extension pretty much automatically. Always have, seem to continue to. So even though I build say a 4-year, budget for a 4-year project, I actually expect it to stretch into 5 years. And so I plan my schedule around that. And I mean, other people may like to do their projects in the timeline that they propose them. I actually don't. Oh, so don't blink. That's a different competition. So the last one was the general ed, and this one is special ed. It looks identical in many ways. At the actual application, there are some differences, but they're very parallel. In fact, we made the mistake this year of not alerting our Office of Sponsored Research properly. And so they ended up submitting it to the other competition, even though we wanted to submit it to special ed. We were able to reverse that quickly, but you know, they look so parallel and they're so similar. So, but you have 2 sets of competitions with 2 sets of funding streams. And that's important if you think you're, you know, to decide which one you think is the best fit in education. The next major decision point for teams is, do you fit one of these topics? You only go after one topic. If you think you don't fit one of these topics or fit across a couple topics, that's not a good sign for being funded. There's not an interdisciplinary advantage in terms of these topics. So if you say, well, we're doing both science and history or science and adult education, that's not going to win points. If you go after the adult education one, you want it to be about adult education, and it's all permitted that it target, you know, science topics, but that should be backgrounded. The foreground should be whatever the topic is, because that's where your reviewers sit. And they probably don't have much expertise in the other areas. And you might want to spend some time convincing them why, you know, a literacy panel should care about science and vice versa. This is where you go to your program officer, because once you have your core idea in an abstract, they can direct you to which panel they think would be sympathetic. And then there's this goal structure that I mentioned earlier. And the key here is measurement grants go up to formative and summative assessments, and then both the development of them and the evaluation of them. Exploration grants, although they're much broader in terms of, they're not quite basic science, they're still applied science and education, and they're supposed to lead to malleable factors. So there's supposed to be a pathway to either a development and innovation grant or a measurement grant. And so whenever you do an exploration grant, you're pretty much telling them, if we are successful here, we expect to now submit for a measurement or a development innovation grant. That is, we're going to take the idea and turn it into a curriculum or an intervention or a set of formal assessments. So that's their sort of goal structure. They've gone away from it a little, but I think it's still their intent that you move through towards scaled up, you know, efficacy trials, which is what the last ones are about, is about efficacy trials. Now, I left them blank here because I actually just almost never compete for them because I don't want to have to do them. That goes back to my careful what you wish for. They don't look like fun to me. And so I'm actually proud, if you'd looked earlier, you would have seen I actually did 2 cycles of a development innovation on the same topic, which is very unusual because if you're sort of successful in the first one, you're supposed to go to the efficacy trial. And I convinced them that we needed another round of the development before we were ready. So this is the evaluation criteria, but the important thing I added, again, I'm just pulling these from sort of giving you a sort of summary guidepost through the application process, is how many pages you should spend and where you should put your time and effort. Because I think that's the way the reviewers work as well. So you don't want to go much more than 7 to 10 pages in your significance, because no matter who your reviewer is, they're going to get tired of you after that much time. It's enough to convince them you know what you're doing. Depending on what you're doing, you may be putting prior research or prior work you've done that gives them confidence you know how to do it. And you may be putting in, if you're developing something, prior development that you've done that convinces them you're in this for the long haul, because you've already been working on it. So those are reasons it stretches longer. But if you're just reviewing areas of the literature to build your argument, I don't know that in my style of doing it, I don't think that's necessary. I think that's a risk. And then the research plan should have at least equal, weight in the reviewer's minds, and therefore equal space in the proposal. And again, look at your call, but again, I'll talk about that more later, but high technical rigor. Because IES seems to be, it's not about, NSF seems to be more about high risk, big ideas, broad social impact. NSF, I'm sorry if I said it. NIH and ICHD is all about adding to the literature, really building the process, the program of science over years. IES is about impact on education. And so they seem to be, is it a good idea? Can you do it? At least that's the formula that's been working for us in a lot of the proposals I see. Is it a good idea? Can you do it? So the other 3 sections are almost boilerplate. I think they're important, but they shouldn't take you much time and effort to put together. And again, like you may have known, they're going to give you scores for each one. But if they don't like your research plan, they're probably going to dip your personnel a point or two, maybe, just because, that's how you do it, right? If you don't like some section, but you have to give an overall lower score, you start hitting the other sections. Whereas if you like them, you don't bother to say something bad about personnel or resource. Everything's fine. So at least, again, I forgot to mention I was on the panel for three or 4 years. So, in years back. So I'm also talking from my experience as a panel member. And so a couple other things to note. The panels aren't perfectly aligned with those topics. So, so if you're hit certain topics and they don't have a full panel for it, they will assign you to the closest panel with the expertise. So for example, the adult education often hits the literacy panel. Unless it's a math topic, then it might hit the math panel. So your program officer will explain for any given year what to expect, and therefore how to adjust that. And like many of these, it's a 2-stage process. And the first step is, and again, you want to put your head in the idea, you're a reviewer, you get 8 to 10 proposals all by yourself. They're 20 plus pages plus appendices. And you're gonna give these a score, and about half of them maybe you're gonna make it to panel, meaning they get higher scores. And just like when you're grading essays and you tend to go, here's my high, here's my low, that's the way they're probably thinking too. So you're sort of trying to, get yourself to the panel, the stage 2, where everybody will, and again, at this point now there's 25 or 30 proposals, of which the reviewers that read yours are 2 or 3, and they've read it pretty well, and the rest of them are going to skim it. Again, these are professionals. They put effort in, but they're also busy professionals. So, you're going to have to be aware of that throughout. Then there's this mystery step that I've just never asked about, because I don't know how they manage across all the panels to figure out how many in each topic get funded, and, based on all these scores. But I don't think that's something, I've never worried about it, and I don't know that that's something to worry about. If you know NSF, you know that they, at least from what I'm hearing, they influence the process. The IES program officers do not influence the review panel. It's their job to help you. So they're in that regard, they're a great resource. They're going to give you all the insights they have. They'll try to help you to craft what they think is a strong proposal based on what they've seen. The only caution I give is they don't always know your area. So, you know, from a distance, they may be giving you, I've gotten advice sometimes that I just thought I should reject, even though it wasn't bad advice. It didn't, to me, reflect what I thought the panel was going to have in mind. And so if you feel strongly about something that you think experts in your field are going to think differently than the program officer, that's something to keep in mind. I noticed in the past year or more that IES is getting better and better at search engines to look at old proposals and other things. So you certainly have webinars and things. So this talk is, you know, if you want more detail, you can just go to the source. They're ready to give it now. The other thing about these grants that's important to know is they are very flexible once you get them. I mean, as long as you set up what broad aims, you're going to get your program officer to agree to many, many different kinds of changes as long as you can justify them. So I think it should take a little of the pressure off as long as you know how to write them well, that you don't have to do it lockstep the way you said, because you were guessing it at the proposal phase. So when the reality hits, if you need to make adjustments, you just talk to the program officer, and they're very good at that. And their software system's a mess. It gets marginally better each year, but it's important to know that in terms of submitting it and getting things done administratively, but it's a mess. Okay, I'm getting to the little advice kind of things, and then we can just talk, I guess. And this was on the assumption that I was going to be talking to Steve, as you said, a set of researchers who haven't really competed for larger grants in like the IES structure before, and that you might want to put teams together. And, yes. And again, it's really, it always just starts with not the proposal call, not the topics. It starts with what is your research agenda, you know? And it's important to understand, you know, the IES is particularly picky about who, meaning if you're going to pick grades 3, 4, 5, or 2, 7, or they do want you to specify your population pretty well. If it's too broad, I've just not seen a lot of projects funded who didn't specify who they were working with, where they were working with them, under what conditions. See, you know, I've had a lot of great ideas where I've talked with people in the early stages, and they're just like, well, I'm really interested in this. And I said, yeah, are you interested in that in middle school or in high school or in higher ed? And, you know, really target, keep working your way, because eventually you have to do this in a real setting. Again, are you ready to spend the 4 or 5 years it'll take to pursue this, and make sure it's really aligned with your own research agenda? And if you don't have a lot of experience with, you know, $1 million to $2 million or 3 over a 5-year span, you need that experience, or you need a team that has that kind of experience, because you're managing. This is not a solo. To me, I've never seen a solo research agenda in an IES grant. It's usually and almost always a team effort, both several faculty professionals, several graduate students, several research assistants. You know, it's a production. And I think, do you want your research to have an impact on, you know, schooling and education pretty much in the near term? I mean, you know, in the space of the grant, you're often you're not just understanding what's going on. You're very often interacting with what's going on. Even in the exploration grants, your aim is to say, what can I do to change what's going on out there? And that's the difference between this, although they don't use the term as much anymore, they used to like use it to death, which is malleable factors. What things can we change out there? And that's a different mindset than, would this just add to the literature? I mean, to get your tenure, to get your scholarship up, you say, how can I add to this specialized literature something people don't know? But I think if you're going after an IES grant, you have to actually take that existential step to say, and I'm willing to change the world while I learn it, which is a crazy thing to do. But I think that's their mindset. They're thinking about getting it out there and impacting what's going on. As I this is elaborating at this point, do I have a stable collaborative team? And, you know, my experience with faculty and others is, and schools, everybody can sign on to something until it's real. And then you have to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort. And you need people on your team to deliver what they are supposed to deliver. So building those relationships early before you start, knowing you can count on people to, you know, be able to do the work. Now, people change and shift, get that. But, you know, you don't want a promissory note from someone that you haven't worked with that you may or may not be able to get things done with. And I strongly recommend, for people who haven't gone after these, either solo teams, if you have collaborations with other research institutions and they're experienced with winning these or doing these, I think IES looks very favorably on cross-institution collaborations and partnerships, and you're sharing the responsibility in a very clean way. I think that's a strong way. That's the way I'd recommend often. Especially with a more experienced researcher who tends to win a lot or do this a lot. Yeah, it gets funded a lot. That's not necessarily from IES, but they get funded a lot. And then again, that was towards the professional side, but towards the school and district side, and wherever you're going to implement your work, you preferably you're working with them beforehand. It's not hard to get letters of support from educational places, I've learned. It's much harder to make sure that they're really there when you start working with them. And at the risk of offending folks, schools are, let's just say they're very busy and sometimes chaotic places. So their stability on their own and their prioritizing your work with them is built over time. You know, the other thing is, again, having been a reviewer, understanding the task, the first reviewers who see yours are going to see 8 20-page plus appendix, et cetera, proposals. Use a very considerate organizational structure. Keep it very close and parallel to the way, what it says in the proposal guidelines about what they're expecting and what they're going to evaluate on. That's not the place to get creative. Always keep reminding the main messages that you're trying to communicate. Don't expect good inference skills for busy people reading lots of stuff. At the end of paragraphs, I often have this, I mean, you know, it's offensive and like there was bold italic. The reason we just said all this is because it's for this important point. So be somewhat sensitive in your rhetoric to smart people, but don't be afraid to remind them. And then again, being redundant, because again, the content reviewer isn't always looking very closely at the research plan. The research plan reviewer isn't always looking so closely at the other parts. So sometimes you do repeat things, and enough to say, as we said, blank, 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 or as we said on page whatever, blank, blank, blank. That way they don't have to go back and find what was going on. The content reviewer, the one who's reading that significance section, with any luck, is somebody you know or knows of you. And so, you know, if you're writing a paper for a journal article, you may say, this paper, this article, this research was sloppy in this, or wasn't rigorous in this. I don't think you want to do that here, because that may be the person judging you. It's better to take the tone that said, this was good work for what it was trying to do, but there are certain gaps, or even they said there were gaps, et cetera. And again, so I've seen paper proposals where they say, well, this is very hard to do, and it's a complete struggle to have that work, and it almost never happened. Again, this is a proposal, not a research article where you're talking about. You can say, except for, but don't sit there and tell them why what you're about to propose can't work. That's just not a winning strategy. And if you believe that, I don't think you should be proposing it anyway. And again, especially for me, the methods section, since that's not my strength, is very peculiar and specific in IES panels, I think. They spread them across the different topic areas, whether they're big experts in that area or not. So work closely with, you know, people like Krep, for example, I saw you there, and others who really understand the review process there, and use them to guide things, like, and don't leave pieces out. Power analysis used to sink for 3 or 4 years. I don't know if it's true now, but you forgot your power analysis and you simply got screened out from getting a winning proposal. I guess I've emphasized this enough at this point. Make sure you really, really want to do it. It's a 4 to 5 commitment, but more than that, because of the backlog now of people who are revising and resubmitting proposals, if they do a good job of that, they're first in line to get funded. That means that it's getting harder and harder to get funded on the first try, which means you may be in a process, a 2-year process of winning, because right now IES is only annual. So they do it every 2 years. If you're in this for the long haul, if this is your research agenda, that shouldn't be a problem. You're going to keep doing the research. You're going to put in a good proposal. They're going to tell you how to fix it. You're going to do even more things while you're waiting. So you're not only going to fix everything they said, but you're going to show them that you've actually made more progress. And that's going to win you in the second round, I think. But if you're not invested in what you're proposing and you're not doing it in the interim, that's, I think, puts you, I think this is built for long-term researchers. And again, note that there's a lot of flexibility in your aims if you don't get too specific. So what you do is you have this broad aim, like we were going to build assessments that crossed summative reading comprehension on a construct to be named later across K through 12. That's what we were told to do. That was our aim. We didn't say we were going to build 40-minute specific ones that looked at this, you know, because the more specific we got, the harder it was to change and do more interesting and different things later. So make them only as specific as needed. And again, program officers, when after you're funded, they build this, I forgot what they call it, but it's the sort of mini contract of what you're going to do. And again, it has a timeline on it that can move. It's got specifics that can change. The aim's the only thing that they're holding you to. So make them broad enough so that you have a lot of room to move around. Those were the things that came to mind in structuring this talk without getting overwhelming about, you know, details and things that, again, I think differentiates maybe IES from some of the other funders. Clearly have had a lot of cycles of working with them. And so, you know, that's useful and important, I think, for anybody, because you get to know the players and what's going on. So, but that's all I got. So did I scare anybody away? Well, that's good. Good sign. Or at least everybody allocated an hour. So
yes. Do you have any questions for John? There's a lot of information there, a lot to consider, especially the portion that you're making a 4 to 5 year commitment. And the first application may not go through, so it might be a 6-year or a longer commitment. Oops.
Yeah.
In the chat. So Luann put in that she served on 2 different IES grants and both had between 5 to 7 faculty and 3 to 4 co-PIs. How do you recommend building a successful team?
I mean, you know, so at the level of faculty, it just takes a lot of compatibility with both the ends of what you're interested and the way you work together, say writing a paper or other things. So you just have to know them and be comfortable with them. I have had what one might call several prickly collaborators over the years that, again, I just know how to work with them. And they're very good. So it's not a matter of them just having nice personalities. It's a matter of you feeling, you know, when they push back, I will respond, as opposed to I will run away and not want to talk to them anymore, which is a bad teammate. Preferably you get to work together on something smaller or different beforehand so that you've built that relationship. And then internally, I think that, again, the issue is like, do you have a sort of education lab or something where you've worked with students or research associates over one, 2 or 3 years, so that you understand the evolution of the relationships of getting work done and hitting deadlines and things like that. Now, I had the experience you kind of mentioned there, both in a small business world of production management, and then in these early grants of understanding the sort of treating them like, like you would a project in a small business with real deadlines, real budgets, real expectations. So sometimes research is exactly like that, of course, and whether it's large funding or small funding. And if you've had that experience, so that's the managing a team part. Sort of, can you manage it from top to bottom? Those are a couple of the things I think about most. I have to tell you, I have definitely built projects where I've invited in partners from other institutions that I hadn't worked with before, even if I knew them. And I sort of make a mental commitment to the idea that they're going to get their sub-award. Hopefully they're going to get their work done, and this is going to work out great. But if they don't, they're still good. They do, in other words, it's a crapshoot. And I've won and lost on that crapshoot sometimes. Like, they were good enough to help us win it. They weren't good enough to help us really get a lot done in the way I had hoped. But I didn't make my project dependent on that sort of risky relationship. I knew how to get it done with or without them. And they did good work, and they were professional. They just didn't get, like we said, you're going to do this, and they never did that. So I just took what they could give me and got it done. So, so again, I think if you've worked a little bit of experience, start now working with certain people that you want to work with, if you haven't worked with them before.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So John, talking about resubmission, so if you are resubmitting something, should you point that out? Should you say, we've submitted this before, we learned this from the previous review, we made these changes, or should you not even go there?
They give you 3 pages to specifically respond to both the panel reviews and the individual comments. And it's best to handle it like a revise and resubmit of a journal article in terms of structure. Sort of consolidate when you think there are common issues across the reviewers a little bit, briefly restate what they are, tell them how you're addressing it and where in the proposal you fix things. And, and then just make sure to be, get them all. Make sure you've covered every single one thing they've said. And they give you 3 pages to do that response. So, so that's how that's handled. And the thing to keep in mind is, responding to all the statements is not a guarantee of the rest, that there weren't things left off that the panel or others care about in the next review. So I think it's important that you fix enough problems that you might have known you put into the first one in the second go round. Now, you don't have to announce them in your 3 pages, but if you know you screwed up something or it was really unclear, or you're going to do things differently, there may very well have been panel members who just didn't get that into the summary, because the summary of the panel discussion I've always found is not detailed. And so there are unstated things that might have bothered people that didn't show up, and they will show up next time. So, so I think that's the important thing is, think of it as your best foot forward the second time, not just fixing what they said. So, I mean, the other thing to know for you or your colleagues is if you get serious about going after an IES. Now, I should have mentioned earlier, I've clearly done most of my work on the literacy panels and some on the ed tech panels. That's where I've been funded. But if you're serious and you think that I could be helpful in the development process of the proposal, or as a contributor, that's why I'm here. In recent years, and you can see it a little bit on the list, a lot of the folks here that I worked with, this was the first time they won one of these IES proposals. Okay, that's why I called it a Sabatini production. It's like they were going in sort of novice. And I said, okay, well, I've been down this road here. Let's work it this way. And in some cases I had, most of the cases I was a PI role, but I wasn't the lead idea person when it's their grants. I was really more of the structuring. And I think this last round, even more so. I'm sort of a secondary character actor in this proposal, in some of these. Yeah, one of them, I will not name which one. I even teased with them afterwards because they kept trying to write my bio into the personnel line, and you're supposed to tell them what they're going to do in the project. And it seemed obvious to me that I was the person who didn't fit. Like they already had more expertise in each of the areas that I represented, so they didn't need my expertise. And I said, well, I think what you should really do is give me like a chunk of this and then tell me to go home when you get funded, because it's like you really got, the team here is really, really strong without me. And it's really just kind of shaping how to get it together. It's like everything, like for right now with NSF, a lot of my colleagues here do NSF proposals. I don't have a clue. It's amazing how little of this transfers, some, some does, but some just clearly does not transfer to different kinds of competitions. So there are just little things that you sort of get from the experience over time. But I think especially for those who aren't the ones who are really experienced, haven't run the big ones. Again, I've worked with Dan and Todd on this last round. I haven't actually done projects with them yet, but they're also solid teammates. Mm-hmm. So for both getting it together, and hopefully we'll get funded.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Sabatini?
Is there like one key thing, like you say, if you're going to do this one thing in your proposal, this is what you should focus on? And on the flip side, is there one thing that you should avoid doing that would really just sort of sink your proposal?
Well, the second one, I think of all the things I said, I think the one where you sort of essentially criticize your own approach is probably, to me, the worst thing you can do. I mean, they need confidence that they can give you $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million now. They don't want you to look like you don't even know if you think you can do it. So I just think that's a bad rhetorical strategy. I do 2 things I didn't mention. I set them all up as problem solution. And in the first page or 2, I try to grab them. Like, it sounds like I'm writing a 5th grade, sort of story from my teacher. You know, I basically go, this is, and then I, when I can, I have a hook. I'll explain the hook in a minute. So I'll just say this, you know, this is a big national problem. Yeah, that's easy. This is a way to look at this problem in terms of these kinds of features that somebody else hasn't thought of putting together yet. And this is how we're going to solve exactly that set of problems in this thing. And solve can mean new research that one way or another, we're going to know how this goes. The hooks, one of the first hooks was, we were doing a project on developing vocabulary assessments. And we said, well, there's these two dimensions, breadth and depth. But nobody's really worked out how these constructs work differently in detail. In fact, there is a pair of papers out there where one researcher used a particular measure and called it breadth, and the other researcher used the exact same measure and called it depth, which tells you why there's confusion out there. That's the hook. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I guess somebody does need to work on that if people are using the same instrument and calling it two different things. The other one that was effective for us in recent years was the thresholds. So in the knowledge grant we did, we said, there's a knowledge threshold where if you don't have enough background knowledge, you can't build understanding of a text you're reading. And we can identify where that threshold is by using a couple good instruments. So this knowledge threshold would tell us when you have to give more prerequisite, basic, you know, foundational knowledge to somebody before you give them content area reading. It's a cool idea. We had some evidence of how we'd done that in the area of decoding, I think. I didn't believe we would find it. We actually did, which was really cool. After we got funded, there actually was a knowledge threshold that we could detect. But it's such a neat idea. The ideas we just went in with, which I think are really got that kind of style to them, are when do you transition children from oral reading to silent reading? I'm doing this with Beth Meisinger. Turns out if you know our field, he said, well, we looked and we can't find a single teacher education guide that talks about it for more than a third of a page. And we can't find a single scientific research study that identifies when or how you should make that transition. But every child must transition from some level of oral reading to silent reading, and it must happen somewhere between grades 2 and 4. And yet nobody's researched this. So that's the kind of thing that grabs the attention of your review panel, that this is a really worth, well, let me read more. Let me find out how they're going to attack this thing. So I think if you can come up with that way of presenting a sort of problem and a solution to it that's you know, sort of would even interest a researcher. That's great. It's not necessary. I can't say that all of the projects we've done had those kinds of hooks in it, but some were just solid. You know, good research, I think. But I think those that would be the answers I'd give you. It's not a catchphrase. It's giving people a way of understanding the significance of what you're doing in a way that's, you know, catches their attention. I think that's important to point out, since I've been in a project recently where everybody goes, they had a catchphrase, and I'm like, I don't think it's a catchphrase. I think this particular group happened to find a way in a sentence to cleverly say what their whole proposal was about. It's just allowed you to be very memorable. That's what makes it a hook. Now you remember what this is all about.
Thank you very much.
So as you, Steve, and others, as I mean, it's clearer and clearer to me now that I'm here that I'm an educational psychologist researcher. I'm in the psychology department. I'm in IIS, having a great time. But if you look at the history of my research, it's ed psych education. So partnering with College of Ed should be a natural for me.
Yeah, it would make sense.
So I hope I'll have opportunities to do that.
I hope so too. Are there any other questions for John? If not, I'll close. John, thank you very much. I really appreciate your taking the time to spend with us and talking about it. And again, our goal is to try and look at creating partnerships and hopefully generating more applications and more partnerships with you, but also with the College of Education participating.
And by the way, if there, I think there's one more. If it's in the area of literacy or reading, I don't have the bandwidth to do several great projects, I think, that, you know, so if you're sort of like, all right, I don't have my own pressing thing yet, but I know what I'm interested in, I'd love to try to work with, you know, sort of add people to our team. Because again, I'm out of sort of bandwidth. I have a lot of external researchers that have a lot of good ideas to work with them. And just sort of, if I can't possibly put together teams to handle some of these interesting ideas. So that's another approach, but yeah, some might take me up.
Thank you. Even that connection would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I can also refer.
Also very helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody. For those of you that are grading, thank you for taking the time out of grading to listen and participate today. And if I don't see you before, have a happy Thanksgiving. I appreciate it very much. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.